Senator Marco Rubio, how are you, sir?
I am well. How are you?
I'm doing great. All right, first of all, there was this big hearing today on the FCC and this really 3 out of the 5 panel members. Where does this commission come off nationalizing in essence, the Internet?
Well, first of all, they're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist, which is this idea that somehow providers are going to discriminate against people and against content providers by allowing easier access to one over the other. That's a problem that doesn't exist. I mean, people can pay for higher speeds and lower speeds as they can with any other commercial product. But here, first of all, you're now messing with something that isn't broken, which is the Internet, which has been grown under the auspices of the United States to provide all sorts of growth and productivity and innovation. And now you've involved government in trying to regulate something that isn't broken. And here's the second concern about it. If companies that provide the infrastructure, the lines in which we communicate, the Wi-Fi, et cetera, if they cannot make a profit, in essence, if they cannot create faster products by charging more for them, they won't develop those products. And the end result of not developing those products is going to be slower connection times for people. But here's a very real-world example of what socialized Internet looks like. You look at Australia. They still have Blockbuster Video in Australia. One of the reasons why they still have Blockbuster Video in Australia is because they are constrained on how much data people can get because it's basically been socialized. They have something like a net neutrality. And the result is that streaming video isn't available to everybody. So you still have Blockbuster Videos where people have to go in and rent a movie or something else. And I'm not saying we're going to go back to that level or that extreme, but you will see less investment and less innovation in the Internet and in wireless technology as a result of this long-term especially. So it is just another governmental overreach by 3 appointees of an administration who believes government should have no limit.
And weren't they taking direction, at least broadly, from the White House?
I don't think they deny it. I don't think there's any doubt that that's the case. It's not a coincidence the president comes out in November saying what he said, and then in December the commission moves forward on something like this. You know, they've been slapped down once before already by a court. I think there's a chance that could happen again. The better solution is when we have a new president, it'd be someone who's going to appoint a majority of commissioners who will then reverse something like this, because its impacts over time are going to be felt.
And who might that be? All right, just kidding. Now, let me ask you this, Senator Rubio. Can you give us, I'm serious about this, a succinct statement on what is now your immigration viewpoint?
Well, it's pretty straightforward, and that is I still believe we have a problem we have to address. It is the 3-tiered problem. The first is that we're not enforcing our immigration laws. We have sections of the border that are insecure, one in particular. We have visa overstays because we don't have a functional, or they haven't put in place a functional entry-exit tracking system. We don't have a workable E-Verify that everyone's required to use. So that's the first topic that has to be dealt with. And what I think with the lesson from the last couple of years that I've taken away is not necessarily that people think this is a problem that can be ignored, but the fundamental argument that I've heard loud and clear from people all over the country is we are not prepared to do anything on immigration until we know that this is never going to happen again. We don't want you to tell us it's going to happen. We don't want you to tell us how it's going to happen. We want to see you do it first. And once you've done it...
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I don't think there's any debate about it now, because if you've seen what's happened over the last 4 years, on 2 occasions the president has issued executive orders that basically order the federal government to ignore enforcing the immigration laws. And the last one in particular is incredibly egregious. It's 6, 7, 8 million people. And what he's basically announced is, I know what the law is, but I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to order my law enforcement agencies not to enforce the law, in essence rewriting the law as a result of it. So the fundamental argument against immigration reform is we can't do it until they enforce the law. And then, in fact, the president refuses to enforce the law. At that point, you've kind of, at least as long as he's president, closed any opportunity to do anything meaningful on it. Now, I still think we have to modernize our legal immigration system. It's a family-based system. It doesn't work anymore for America. We need to have a merit-based system. It can't just be based on whether or not you have a... All
right, stop there. I want people to hear that, because while you understand this, a lot of people may not. We have chain migration now that drives the system. It's really been in place since 1965. Excuse me. And what you're saying is you're not that excited about chain migration. There ought to be a merit-based system. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so think about it this way. Every year there are 3 million new Americans. 2 million are born here in this country. 1 million immigrate here legally and permanently. The million that immigrate here legally and permanently do so primarily on the basis of whether or not they have a relative living in the United States. not on the basis of whether or not they're going to have something to contribute economically, what skills they have, what can they do for the future of this country and for themselves. It's largely based on whether you have a relative living here or not. And I'm just saying that can no longer be the primary determinant of who gets to immigrate here legally or not. And it doesn't work in the 21st century, which is a skills-based economy. So that needs to be changed as well, but I don't even think you can get to that. And I still do think we've got to face up to the fact we've got millions of people living here illegally that have been here for a long time, but you can't even have a debate about that or a conversation as long as people know that you will have another 10 million people here in a decade because they refuse to enforce the law.
So how does this position differ from your backing of this comprehensive bill then in the Senate? It is different.
Well, in the sense that bill tried to do it all at once. In essence, it tried to do both the legalization aspect of it, but also the enforcement aspect of it. Now, technically, the enforcement aspect was going to come first, and it put it in place and argue we were going to do this, we're going to do that to enforce the law. The argument people would say is it doesn't matter what you put in the law, this administration won't enforce it. No matter what you write into law, they'll ignore it. And, in fact, that's what's happened with the executive order. That's, in fact, what he's done. He's ignored the law. And so at that point, the argument that no matter what you write into law, it isn't going to be enforced takes on an increasing amount of credibility because it has, in fact, happened. You now have an executive order telling people that despite the fact the law says this, we order you not to enforce it. And at that point, it's checkmate. That argument is now crystal clear. And irrespective of whether he had done that or not, which obviously is a violation of the Constitution and outrageous and blatantly violative of our system of government and our rule of law, the bottom line is the political atmosphere just isn't there. People don't trust Washington. They don't trust massive pieces of legislation. And that you're simply not going to get a serious endeavor to work on this as long as Barack Obama's president. And you're certainly not going to get political support to move forward on anything until this is dealt with first. And I think that's crystal clear at this point.
Senator Rubio, what do you make of Netanyahu's victory? And still, this administration and its surrogates, they're trashing the guy.
The first thing I make of it is it reminds us of why we want the rest of the Middle East to be like Israel. It's a democracy. It's a developed economy. It's a strong American ally. I wish every country or more countries in the Middle East were like Israel. So that's the first thing we should celebrate. They had a legitimate and valid election last night in Israel, and I wish there were more of that going on around the world. And I wish there were more countries that are as strong an ally of the U.S. as Israel is. On the point you raised about Netanyahu, the White House today is saying we're very concerned about the divisive language coming out of that election, which is ironic since they themselves employed an extraordinary amount of divisive language in the last two elections, the last three elections going back to 2008. But the other point I would make is, if you recall, in 2009, think about it this way, in 2009, there was a fraudulent election in Iran where the Green Revolution happened and people were beaten and killed in the streets of Iran for protesting a fraudulent election. And the White House said, we are not going to comment on that election because we do not want to interfere in the sovereignty of another country. So they refused to comment on the fraudulent elections of Iran, but now they are criticizing the elections in Israel. That tells you everything you need to know. They are treating the Iranian regime with more respect than they treat our allies in Israel.
What do you think is driving this president? I mean, his positions are so counterintuitive, incoherent, and, quite frankly, enormously destructive.
I think that he realizes he's got less than 2 years left in the presidency. He's trying to achieve as much as he can of this agenda, this kind of vision he had of himself as some sort of historic figure that redefined American life for the 21st century. I think they're desperate for achievements, and therefore, his people have openly said that the deal with Iran is going to be to the second term what Obamacare was to the first. I think at this point they're not so much interested in what the deal with Iran is as they are interested in just having a deal so they can point to as an achievement. I think that's driving a lot of what they're doing. But they've realized they've given up working through the republics and through our system of government that we have and are trying to figure out how can they exceed their powers to achieve policy goals that allow him to say that he was a historic transformational figure in American history.
Well, that he is, but for many reasons that are problematic. Now, you saw that speech by Netanyahu. I didn't see a lot of Democrats sitting on their hands, did you?
I didn't, and as I said, I'm glad. Look, the commitment to Israel has always been a bipartisan issue in America.
But I mean, the argument out there has been that he's gone sideways with the Democrats. I swear I saw them jumping up and down, applauding with all the Republicans.
Well, the 2 points on that. The first is Benjamin Netanyahu is the prime minister of Israel. He's not a Republican or a Democrat. He's doing what's right for his country. We should care about his country because they're our strongest ally in the region. We have a deep historical tie to that country and what Israel represents. People forget the Jewish state was created primarily in its genesis as to ensure that never again would Jews not have a place to go if they're being persecuted somewhere in the world. And this happened, of course, in the aftermath of the Holocaust and the Second World War. That alone morally binds us to Israel's security and long-term stability. And so we should be supportive of that. And when the leader of that country comes to us and says, we are deeply concerned, we live in this neighborhood, we understand the realities of Iran, we should take that very seriously. But my broader point is, anytime American policymakers, especially the president, show distance between us and Israel, it emboldens Israel's enemies to act against Israel's interests. And right now, if you take a step back and view things, it almost appears that this president has a stronger relationship and alliance with Iran than he does with Israel and the prime minister.
It's amazing. It really is. I don't think they talk to the people in Iran the way they talk about and to the prime minister of Israel.
If I would have told anybody 5 years ago that we were going to have a president who was going to be more respectful of the supreme leader of Iran than he is of the prime minister of Israel, you would say that's impossible. That's stuff for the movies. That's just never going to happen. It is happening, and it is outrageous and unacceptable.
All right, Senator Marco Rubio, we appreciate it. You take care of yourself. All right.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you for having me on.